Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and here on this channel we discuss all things related to Dungeons and Dragons, as well as other role-playing games. But today I am sick, so please bear with me. I will probably be sniffling and generally unpleasant. Let's just blame my poor constitution for that. Today we're going to be talking about the Arcane Trickster, which is probably my favorite rogue archetype, at least from the player's handbook, but maybe my favorite overall. I really like the idea of being able to combine spells with a class that's already pretty sneaky and deceptive by nature. And the class is very flexible. You can perform a lot of different skills and you can be very good at them, especially with things like expertise and reliable talent. You can have skills that, even if they're not with things proficient attributes, like say to charisma, like persuasion or deception checks, even with just a modicum of charisma at higher levels, you can be a very, very suave, deceptive type of person because you can have things like expertise, and even if you don't, just having this proficiency alone combined with things like reliable talent mean that you're always going to have at least a mediocre result. I mean, consider this for a moment, that if you had, let's say, a +5 proficiency bonus at higher levels, and you were performing something you were proficient in, like so let's say sneaking, but you actually had expertise, and even if you rolled a 1 on a die 20 due to reliable talent, that 1 now counts as a 10. You now get your proficiency bonus, which in your case is doubled because you have expertise. So that's another +10 to the roll. Plus now you add your ability modifier, which since it's dexterity, we can assume is going to be a +5 at that level. And you have a 25. You rolled a 1 and you will have a 25. So even things like deception and persuasion and whatnot, you can be very, very good at them. And so the ability to just pick up a lot of skills and be at least pretty proficient, even if you're not putting a lot of points into these other attributes, is quite appealing. And then combined with things like illusions, you can be very good at it. So not only can they be a pretty decent face, but it can also be a pretty good damage dealer, of course, because of sneak attack. And you also get some cantrips and some low-level spells you can use to help yourself out and become even better in that role. And of course, you're still a rogue, so you can be the sneaky traps guy, but due to being an Arcane Trickster, you can get things like a familiar. And now you can use your familiar to help you with that role, to help you scout and things like that. You can use Mage Hand, and with the Mage Hand Legerdemain ability, you can start manipulating doors and traps and locks and anything else that you could normally do with your own hands, you can do with your Mage Hand. So open the chest from 20 or 30 feet away instead of opening it and having the poison dart go off in your face. You know, it becomes just a very, very strong class that can do a lot of different things and do them all pretty well. So I missed talking about races when we were discussing the cleric video, which is unfortunate. So I think we'll start there today. And obviously there's going to be some standouts. Anything that's giving you dexterity is going to be a solid choice. So any of the elves, halflings are all solid choices. In particular, I really like the high elf. This is almost made to be an Arcane Trickster, it feels like, with +2 to your dex, +1 to your int. Those are both your main stats you're going to probably be looking into. And you get a bonus cantrip, which is nice too, because you don't have a ton of cantrips as an Arcane Trickster. So getting an extra one is a nice little benefit. You'll also get proficiency with longbows, which is very nice if you want to be a ranged attacker, because rogues only get short bows and crossbows. They do not get longbows. But high elves do. In fact, all elves do. So you'll automatically have the longbow proficiency, and sneak attack has to be either with a finesse weapon, or a ranged weapon. So longbow works with sneak attack just perfectly fine. Wood elves aren't as good, I wouldn't say, but +1 to wisdom still isn't bad. There's a lot of wisdom saves in the game. You're still getting the +2 to your dex, and some extra movement certainly never hurts either. Forest gnome is a pretty strong choice. I also like the Lightfoot and the Stout Halflings. Both are really solid. Lightfoot, you can try to hide behind medium-sized creatures or people, which is pretty nice. is especially good if you say multi-class with a ranger, and you can take Beastmaster, and somebody could actually have a decent Beastmaster ranger because you're barely a ranger. That's why. But you could hide behind your animal companion, and that'd be all right. Um, Half elf is especially good if you're planning on being more of the party face type role because you got the 2 charisma, but you're still getting +1 to 2 different stats. So you can take your dex and intelligence, give +1 to both of those, +2 to your charisma. You're getting a lot of the elven advantages still, like Fey ancestry and whatnot. Get the trance ability, which it's all right. And in general, though, half elves are pretty strong. I think you also get an extra skill proficiency or 2, which is excellent as well with reliable talent, like I already mentioned earlier. Obviously, the variant human. Not only do you get a bonus feat, which is why most people take variant human, but you also get bonus skill as well on the variant human, which, like I said, is amazing. So variant human is a very strong choice. The only problem is, of course, you can't see in the dark, but neither can some of the other races. So I'm sure you'll live with it. Feral Tiefling is very good, replacing the +2 charisma with a +2 to your dex. And just in general, if you're looking through some of the other, we don't really use the Genasi and all the other ones like that. But if your Dungeon Master allows them, then just anything that's going to give you bonuses to your dex is going to be pretty good. And if it gives you bonuses to your dex and your intelligence, then you're probably gold. Or Constitution, which is just never a bad stat to have anyways. So as for the actual abilities that set the Arcane Trickster apart from other rogues, I won't bother going through all the rogue base features, but obviously at level 3 you're going to get the Mage Hand Ledger Domain, so you can use you get Mage Hand for free if you didn't already have it, and you can use your Mage Hand to do basically anything you could do. At level 9 you're going to get Magical Ambush, which is that if you're hidden and something doesn't know you're there, then it gets disadvantage on a saving throw from a spell you use. And this is, it can be really good in the right circumstances. Hitting somebody with a hold person spell and forcing them to save at disadvantage is obviously very nice. But it's pretty circumstantial at the same time, because a lot of times you might not want to open with a spell. You might want to be using like a sneak attack or something instead. But the fact that you now have the option of using either one, I think is pretty solid. It's a pretty decent ability. I wouldn't say it's like phenomenal, because a lot of your spells, you're not going to have like the same spell save DC that a dedicated caster will, because you're probably going to be focusing more on your dexterity than on your intelligence. But, at least saving with disadvantage if you only have, say, a spell save DC of like 13 or 14 at mid levels, there's a good chance they're going to fail that still. At level 13, you get the Versatile Trickster ability. It's pretty strong overall, but I don't think it's really a game changer. And at 17, you get Spell Thief, which is the one that everybody always looks at and always thinks that it's super amazing. And it can be, but when you really look at it, it can be very circumstantial, because basically you see somebody else casting a spell, you use your reaction to try to steal a spell. If it affects you, or if it's an AoE and you're in the area, you can do that. And then it forces them to have to make a spell, or have to make a saving throw versus your spell save DC for whatever their attribute is. The problem is they're probably proficient in whatever that was. So if it's a wizard, they're going to be proficient on intelligence saves. If it's a warlock, they're going to be proficient with the charisma saves. And your spell save DC probably isn't going to be, the best. Also, you can only use the spell yourself after you've stolen it if it's of a level that you could use. So you can use spells that are outside your class, which is okay. You can steal like cleric or bard or druid spells. But if you steal like a 6th or 7th level spell, you can't actually cast it. It does deny your opponent the ability to cast it for the rest of the day, essentially, which isn't so bad. But if it's a high level spell, they probably only had 1 or 2 slots for it anyways. But where I think this spell really shines is when you can actually know what the opponent's casting, and especially if you can force them to try to use a counter spell on one of either your spells or a teammate's spell, and then you can spell steal counter spell, because it is of a level you can cast, and counterspell is just an excellent thing to have. It's also low enough that in a prolonged fight, if you're fighting like some sort of legendary caster boss type guy, he's probably going to be able to cast a lot of counterspells through that fight. So stealing his ability to counterspell, and not only did you steal the spell and the spell slot is now gone, but he cannot cast counterspell now. And so now you can completely shut down his ability to try to deal with your allies or even your own casting. And so, like I said, it is circumstantial. It's not always great. But when it works, it can be amazing. Unfortunately, it's not till 17th level. But if your campaign goes late enough that you can actually use it, then, it's the kind of thing where you'll be talking about it 10 years later. Remember when I spell stole, whatever off the guy. And, it can be very, very powerful. Obviously, one of the things that sets the Arcane Trickster apart from other rogues is, of course, spell casting. So I wanted to take a look at different spells that you can take. Because remember, the Arcane Trickster is mostly limited to the illusion and enchantment schools. But occasionally they can add schools or spells from schools outside of those. So as far as your cantrips go, I really like either Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade. I've discussed this in other videos before, but if you're going to be a melee fighter or a melee combatant, since you're not a fighter, but if you're going to be using melee attacks a lot, then I really like either one of those, especially Booming Blade on the Arcane Trickster. I think is probably the better choice of the two, but both are pretty strong. And the reason is you only have one attack anyways, so you can use this spell as part of your attack action. It's not interfering with, like if you're an Eldritch Knight, for example, you could have 3 or 4 attacks around at higher levels. But if you use Booming Blade, that's the only attack you get, because that required your action to cast that spell. As the Arcane Trickster, you don't have to worry about that. You only had one attack with your attack action, so you might as well just hit as hard with it as you can. And isn't that what the rogue's trying to do, this sneak attack in general? Just hit as hard as humanly possible. Obviously, Minor Illusion is going to be great, because that's one of the only skills you can take, but Minor Illusion is one of the better cantrips anyways, in my opinion. I also like Message, and if you're looking for a ranged attack, then something like Firebolt or Toll the Dead could be alright. I hate to say it, but even something like Poison Spray could be okay combined with Magical Ambush, because Poison Spray in general isn't as good as some of the others, but giving people disadvantage helps a lot. As far as first level spells, obviously you get access to Sleep, which is one of my go-tos on wizards and sorcerers at first level, or whoever else can get it actually, because that's one of the best first level spells you can get. But Sleep becomes very irrelevant very quickly. And the problem with the Arcane Trickster is you're not getting it until 3rd level. And really by 3rd or 4th level, Sleep isn't really so great. And so I think it can sometimes become kind of a trap option where people think, oh hey, Sleep. And they pick that up as their first spell, and it's mostly irrelevant by the time you've hit 3rd or, well, especially 4th or 5th level. There's no point in really using it. And unlike a lot of, like, say, wizards where you've got a ton of spells and you can just choose to not prepare Sleep anymore when you get to those levels, you are very limited in your selection, it's harder for an Arcane Trickster to replace their spells than it is for a wizard. So just be aware of that. If you're planning on using it for a couple of levels, you might, just want to skip it entirely. That's not to say that Sleep isn't awesome. Sleep is one of the best spells in the game as a first level caster. It's just, you're a 1/3 caster, not even a half caster like Paladins and Rangers are. You're a 1/3 caster, and Sleep just isn't a great choice. Disguise Self is a great choice, though. You're already trying to be a sneaky guy, and being able to disguise yourself is going to help with that a lot. Silent Image is kind of redundant because Minor Image is, or Minor Illusion is basically is good almost, and it's a cantrip, so it won't require a spell slot. But this does add a few other things, like, it can like move and stuff like that. So there might be times when you think, yeah, okay, it's worth picking up. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is pretty decent as a control spell. Of course, your spells probably aren't going to be quite as good because, like I said, your spell save DC is going to be lower than a pure caster. But again, with something like Magical Ambush, Tasha's Hideous Laughter can be very, very effective. As far as spells from outside those schools, I really like Find Familiar, obviously. In my opinion, it's one of the best spells that you can take at first level as well. Familiars can add a lot of versatility to your character, and they're nice for tracking things. They're nice just to have as a scout. I've talked about in our Dragon Heist campaign where we were trying to follow these guys through a crowd, and if it wasn't for the Wizard's Familiar, we would have lost them for sure almost. But thanks to his hawk, he was able to track them and, report back. I also really like Fog Cloud because as far as like obscurement type spells go, it's one of the best in the game. It's low level. It lasts quite a while. Affects a large area. And because of the way the cunning action works, you can very easily like engage somebody and then disengage and step back into your own cloud, giving them disadvantage to try to attack you because now you're obscured. And you can do that pretty regularly, especially if you're using like a bow or something like that. You can just move out, shoot, move back in. Second level spells. Hold Person obviously is one of the best ones you're going to be able to take at this level. I also like Invisibility, obviously. You're already trying to be sneaky, so why not be invisible? Suggestion is an excellent choice, especially if you can give them disadvantage, say through Magical Ambush again. Mirror Image, if you're going to be up front and engaging in combat a lot, if you're going to be like a melee guy using Booming Blade, for example, then Mirror Image is probably something you're going to want to use, especially if you're planning on taking feats like Sentinel, which I'll talk about more later. But if you're going to be hanging around in melee combat, Mirror Image is going to become very important. Blur is another great option as well, but Blur is going to use your concentration, so it's up to you to decide which one. You could use both, technically, and just layer your defenses together, but now it's a pretty heavy investment, so who knows. I'll just throw those ideas out there. You can take what you like, ignore the rest. Shadow Blade is pretty decent damage buff. I mean, you're adding quite a bit. It's psychic damage. If you're fighting in dim or dark conditions, then you get advantage on the attacks, which, is going to work well with sneak attack. So I think Shadow Blade's one that is definitely worth a look at least. Just be aware that you're not going to have the higher level spell slots that a lot of pure casters would have, so you're not really going to be able to upcast it the way that they can. You're basically just going to be stuck with your basic Shadow Blade. But like I said, it's still not a bad option. It will use your concentration, but it can be a nice source of damage. And the Shadow Blade has the finesse property, so you don't have to worry about it with sneak attack. It'll still work. Other ones from outside of your main two schools, Levitate isn't bad, especially if you're going to be like a bow guy. But, if you get hit and lose concentration, that could be a problem. But still, it's a nice way of removing yourself from combat or an enemy. Web, of course, is always a great choice at second level. I also like, there's a few good choices. But actually, I was going to say Rope Trick isn't a terrible choice either. A lot of pure casters don't bother taking it, I find. And it's one of those spells when you read it, it looks just absolutely useless. But then when you consider, well, actually, it's an at-will short rest, then it's not so bad, actually. And you can pull the rope up into your little pocket dimension, and it's not the worst spell in the game, that's for sure. Third level, you get Major Image. and you can take Hypnotic Pattern. Hypnotic Pattern is one of my favorite crowd control spells in the game. Unfortunately, as I mentioned already, your spell save is probably going to be a little easier to make than pure casters, but it's still an excellent spell, and because it's an AoE, even if you hit 6 guys with it and you've only got like a spell save DC of, let's say, 14, somebody can miss that just because there's so many of them there. And a lot of enemies tend to have fairly, fairly weak saving throws against that kind of stuff. Depends. If you pick your targets well, then I think Hypnotic Pattern can be very good. Another substitute could be Fear, depending on how you like to play. I generally think Hypnotic Pattern is better, but Fear is never a bad choice either. From stuff outside your main 2 schools, obviously Counter Spell is one of the best third level spells in the game. Fly is pretty strong. Haste is very good, especially because you can use your cunning action as a free dash. But with haste, you have double the movement. So your movement would be sick, absolutely sick with haste. 4th level, you get access to Confusion, which it's not my favorite crowd control spell, but you are kind of limited in choices, so it's not the worst. You get Greater Invisibility, which is my go-to pick on the Arcane Trickster. It's just a phenomenal spell in general, and it's even better when you're trying to be a sneaky stealth guy. Hallucinatory Terrain's not a bad choice either. And from stuff outside your school, Polymorph is starting to become a lot less powerful by the time you can get this at like 13th to 14th level. But it's not necessarily the worst choice you could make. And I kind of like Banishment, because if you use your magical ambush to give somebody disadvantage, then you can just eliminate somebody from the fight just like that, and it's actually pretty potent. And like I've discussed Banishment in the past, it's not my favorite CC spell, but when you give somebody disadvantage, it becomes very strong. As for feats, obviously Alert, you've already got a high dex, and so Alert's gonna be good, just boosting your initiative even further, as well as removing the advantage that invisible creatures have to attack you, which is pretty nice as well. If you want to be a ranged guy, Crossbow Expert is pretty good. Sharpshooter, hard to say, because the problem is you only have the one attack, and the -5 to your hit penalty kind of hurts, because most of your damage isn't going to come from the +10. It's going to come from your sneak attack. And you just don't want to miss that. You've got one attack, you need to hit if you're in combat, because that's the only thing you've got is basically your sneak attack damage. And you're not like a ranger or a fighter, where you've got like the fighting style. Like, a ranger can afford to take Sharpshooter a lot more easily, because he's got the +2 from his fighting style to help compensate for the -5. He's also got more than one attack around, so if he misses on one, it's not as big of a deal. But you are doing a truckload of damage all in one hit, and if it misses, it sucks. So I'm not as big of a fan of Sharpshooter. Lucky is just one of the best and most versatile feats in the entire game. It's pretty hard to go wrong with Lucky. If you're ever like, oh, I want a feat, but I'm not sure what to take, consider Lucky. It's excellent. I mentioned Sentinel earlier, and I really like Sentinel on the Rogue, because the way sneak attack works is you can only make one sneak attack per turn, but that's on your turn. So if you're in combat, say, and somebody, you sneak attack on your turn, and now it's the monster's turn, and it decides to attack the plate armored fighter right next to you, you can use Sentinel to make another attack and get in a second sneak attack in the same round. The problem with Sentinel is that it now requires your squishy rogue to be hanging around in melee combat. And usually a rogue, even if they're a melee rogue, they'll try to get in, attack, and then use their cunning action to disengage and the rest of their movement to get back out again. If you're planning on using Sentinel, you can't really do that. But like I mentioned earlier, there are some things you can do. Things like blur and mirror image will help you to be hit less often, and so it becomes a lot more viable then. Crying baby, that's good. So as for builds, I mentioned in the champion video about the idea of taking just 3 levels of champion and taking like a rogue. That's still obviously very viable. It just basically you're just giving up a couple sneak attack damage and whatever your level 20 ability is. I think it's the one where if you fail something you can re-roll it, or no, you can choose to take a 20. That's what it is. But you're probably going to be good enough by then that it's not really much of an issue. The doubling your sneak attack damage is pretty big. I also like the idea of kind of like an archer build. I tend to really like archer rogues in this game. And there's a few good ones. Obviously, you can go champion fighter still and just take 5 levels of champion and get second attack, which isn't bad. But another option is to go ranger. And you can either take 3 or 5 levels of ranger, either way. But 5 levels gives you a few other good things too. It doesn't just give you a second attack. It'll also give you access to spells like Pass Without Trace. And if you're going to be the sneaky guy, there's no better spell in the game, except for maybe Greater Invisibility, than Pass Without Trace. Pass Without Trace is amazing. Now, that does mean that you would only be able to get up to 15th level Rogue, and you wouldn't get 4th level spells, so you wouldn't be able to get Greater Invisibility in this case. But you don't get those until really late anyways, so it, depending on how you think the campaign is going to go, it might be worth the trade-off. As far as Rangers, I mentioned the Beastmaster Ranger because you could actually take, like, say, like a Halfling. You could have your animal companion, which you could use as a mount in most cases, and you can also hide behind it, which is pretty decent. You can even take a flying mount, depending on, the campaign or where you are. Like if you're based out of Chult, say, then there's some good flying dinosaur beasts that you could pick up as an animal companion. Other ones, though, I really like the idea of the Gloomstalker or the Hunter, because both of these are going to give you the ability to make an extra attack early on, and that's going to give you an extra chance to land your sneak attack. In fact, if you say Hunter and you take the Hordebreaker ability, basically if there's a target within 5 feet of your target, you can make an extra attack on them. And that just gives you an extra chance to get your sneak attack. And it means that going to level 5 isn't quite as important if you really wanted to try to get most out of your attacks. You could only take 3 levels of Ranger if that was your plan. But I still might favor 5 just because Pass Without Trace is so good. There's also some excellent combinations with Bard. And that is because Bard and Rogue actually have a lot of overlapping skills. Bard's going to give you expertise on some stuff. They're going to have a lot of like those party face rolls that we talked about. Well, as good as the Rogue is, the Bard is even better generally. And so by combining them, you can get some really, really nice combinations. Bards also bring a lot of skills to the class as well. And that's just not a bad thing either. If you're playing kind of like the skill monkey type, you can get Jack of all trades, which is going to give you half your proficiency bonus rounded down to any non-proficient skill checks you have to make, which again is just going to help you in that role. And it also gives you access to much better spells than what the limited Arcane Trickster spell schools have. So there's some really strong choices there. In general, I don't really like most of the other multi-classes that much. I think that maybe like some of the other ones like Warlock or whatever can sometimes bring something nice to the table. But generally I find that you're going to be able to get most of that from Bard And Bard's going to have things like expertise, which is going to tie into your thief expertise anyways, and it's just going to be a much better fit. I probably would go Lore Bard, but if you just wanted to, say, make 2 attacks around and didn't feel like going the fighter or the ranger route, you could just take College of Valor or College of Blades, and at level 6 you get a second attack around. And College of Blades will also give you a fighting style as well. So I think there's definitely some merit to that. Now, in general, I have to talk about just the party role of the rogue, because rogues can sometimes be very difficult to play depending on your group composition. If you have people that are willing to let you sneak about and try to spy on stuff and report back to the party, like maybe with message or other spells, or maybe you're familiar, or maybe you just sneak out and then sneak back again, right? Then the rogue will really, really excel. But if you're in a party where all they want to do is kick down the door and beat everything to death with sharp weapons and big sticks, then the rogue can sometimes be very frustrating, because all the things you are good at, your party doesn't care to do or to use, and you can feel very underutilized, and then you just become basically another melee damage or range damage dealer, which you're pretty good at. But let's face it, at higher levels, dedicated combat classes are still going to be better in combat than you are, and you're not really being sneaky. Plus, you don't, with the Arcane Trickster, you're not going to have the high-level spells that the casters have, so you can feel really redundant. So be aware that your party composition and just the people you're playing with will really make a difference in whether or not you enjoy playing this class. I should also point out, for things like skills and expertise usages and stuff like that, back in first edition, rogues were the only ones that could detect traps and pick locks and stuff. But these days, anybody can do it. And by taking things like the criminal background or the street urchin, you can begin with proficiency on thieves' tools. So other classes can do this kind of stuff. And I think sometimes rogues will think, well, I don't really need to worry about it because other people can do it now. But the truth is, any table I've ever been at, the rogue's still expected to be able to be the guy who picks the locks and detects the traps. That's just the way it is. And it's easy to say, well, I don't really want to do that, but you're kind of going to be expected to. And you at least want to make sure that you're adequate, So take proficiency in those kind of skills, because that's kind of going to be part of you. You want to be the face, or even if you want to be the DPS melee guy with booming blade or whatever, you're still going to need to be able to detect traps and pick locks. So it is what it is. What can I tell you? But anyways, that's basically everything I have for the Arcane Trickster. Like I said, I personally really, really like the Arcane Trickster. It's one of my more favorite rogue archetypes. But as I said, it can be frustrating if you're not with the right people. But if you are with the right people, it can be one of the best and most versatile archetypes in the entire game. So that's everything I have. Feel free to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and leave any comments you might have. Even if you hated the video and you disagree with everything I said, that's okay. Leave a comment. I promise to read every comment. And that's all I have. So I'll see you next time.